Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Brutfuner 50 set of Macaron pastel colored pencils. First and foremost, I do kind of want to apologize because these first couple of minutes you're going to be seeing still images that I took of the pencils because I did not get a chance to actually record myself opening and seeing these pencils for the very first time, but I do have plenty of photos, so that's what I'm going to use. Some basic information about the Brutfuner Macarons is it's a set of 50 colored pencils. They have a 3.8 millimeter core. They come in a pink cardboard box, which you can see in this photo here. When you open the pencils up, they are presented to you in 2 plastic trays with 25 pencils per tray, and they actually do come in a kind of sort of color order. They're not just all over the place, so that's nice. These are also described as oily colored pencils, as you can see on the box, but it's a bit weird because when I was reading the Amazon description, I noticed that the description said that they were wax based, so a little bit of a contradiction there, but I do think just on actually using these pencils that they are more oil based, and I'll get into that later. So as far as the appearance of the pencils, visually they look similar to the Faber-Castell Polychromos and the Holbein. I don't personally own any Holbein colored pencils. I know that those are pretty well known for having a really good set of pastels, but just for me, they're a little bit too expensive for me to personally try out. So I can't compare them to those, but I can compare them to Polychromos because I do have those. They have a closed end, so you can't see the core on the other side of the pencil. They have gold metallic writing that includes the Brutfuner branding, the color name, as well as a color number. I noticed that when I first picked up these pencils, like the pencils themselves, they felt very light, and I was curious. So I actually got I have a postal scale that I use that can measure like grams, and I weighed them, an individual pencil from this Brutfuner Macaron set, as well as like a Polychromos and like an Arteza pencil that I had laying around, and they all weighed in at the same amount. So these felt light, but apparently they're not any lighter, or if they are, it's so minuscule that my scale could not tell the difference. But either way, I also felt that the appearance, they look a bit cheap, mainly because some of the color names had typos, as well as you can kind of see like the white or maybe primer that they use on the pencils before they paint over that with the matching color of the pencil, if that makes sense. But those things don't affect the overall performance. Onto the cost, I paid $17.99 for these on Amazon. It does seem like the price fluctuates pretty regularly. I had these in my wish list for maybe 2 or 3 weeks before I actually bought them, and they fluctuated quite a bit. While I had them in my cart, they went from, I think, maybe $17.99, and then they went up to $23.99, and then they went up so much to about $25.99 has been the highest that I've seen them. Amazon doesn't have a list price listed for these pencils. Not that their list prices really mean anything for products like this, so I can't really tell you how much these pencils should cost, but if you are looking for them on Amazon and they're more than like $20, I would wait because they're probably going to go down, and it probably won't take long either. But at $17.99 a pencil, that equals out to 36 cents per pencil, and even at the higher price point that I've seen at $25.99, that brings you to 52 cents a pencil, so not bad at all. They're not available open stock, which I personally wouldn't expect at this price point anyway. But one thing I did find was interesting was that there were multiple. First of all, there's like so many different listings for these pencils on Amazon. I'm guessing there's multiple people selling them and they're all selling them under individual listings. I don't know. But aside from that, also certain listings, not all of them, will have different size sets available. So I have the 50 set. I've also seen a 12 and a 24 set, and those look like the same pencils, just smaller sets. And then there's also an 80 set, which I can't confirm if that is the same as the 50 set, because the pencils do look different as far as the design of the pencils. So I'm not 100% sure on if those are the same pencils or not, but I'm pretty sure just based on the product photos that the 12 and 24 sets are the same as this 50 set that I have here. So what you've been looking at here is footage of me actually using the colored pencils. So now I'm going to get into how they performed. So like I mentioned earlier, the box says that they're oily colored pencils, which one would assume to mean that they're oil based, while the product description on Amazon said that they were wax based. Just my personal opinion, I think that these are more oil-based pencils just because I was able to get down a lot of layers and do a lot of mixing of colors without encountering any kind of waxy buildup whatsoever. Even in instances where I can tell that I had kind of filled the page with about as much pigment as it would take, which didn't happen on this paper that I'm using here, which is the Strathmore colored pencil paper, but I did color a page out of a Coloring Heaven coloring book where I did kind of get to that point, and even though it was like I couldn't put down much more pigment, it wasn't like there was so much wax on the page that was what was preventing me from being able to put down more pigment, if that makes sense. As far as the colors that are available in the set, I'll put a picture of the swatch chart that I made up on the screen. It's a good array of colors. I do feel like, especially for a pastel set, it's lacking in light pinks and purples, which tend to be the kind of colors I think of when I think of a pastel set. The colors in this set tend to be heavy on greens and neutrals and yellow colors, which is fine, but I would have liked more pinks and purples. There's even, like I said, there are light neutral colors in here as well, so you can actually color light skin tones with this set. So this could be a somewhat all-inclusive set if it was all you had. The pencils lay down color nicely, but they did leave a lot of crumbs even when I was using light pressure. I didn't really have the issue so much, honestly, when I was coloring this specifically, but when I was doing my color chart, my swatch chart, I did notice quite a bit of crumbs being left behind. So, if you're going to be doing a lot of layers or a lot of burnishing, expect crumbs because they're probably going to happen. The pencils also layer very well and mix very well. I tend to do a lot of layers and kind of mixing of colors when I color, and I didn't encounter any issues with that whatsoever. The pencils also sharpen easily. I used a couple of different sharpeners, but I mainly used my Faber-Castell pencil sharpener, and I had no issues with uneven sharpening or breakage or anything like that. So now I'm going to get into a colored pencil test that I like to do with my colored pencils. This test sheet consists of 6 different tests. Those tests consist of a basic swatch test where I just swatch out a basic red, purple, blue, green, yellow, and orange and see just how well they lay down and how pigmented they look. I also do some basic color mixing to see how well we can mix different colors to create new colors. I also do a layering test where we can see how many layers we can put down on the paper before we can't get any more down. A blending test where I use a variety of different blending mediums to blend the colored pencils together. There's also an eraser test where I see how well the pencils can be erased. And then a basic coloring test, which the footage that you were looking at earlier that I was coloring was actually from that. So as far as the basic swatch, I was actually kind of afraid I wasn't going to be able to get a just kind of basic red, yellow, blue, green, orange, and purple since this was a pastel set, but they actually were all here. So I think the photo looks a bit odd, and I may see if I can fix it, but I have a picture of this completed sheet on my blog, which is artbyness.wordpress.com if you want to see it and look at it on your own time. So I was satisfied with just the kind of basic colors in the set. Onto the color mixing test, I was also impressed with this. I was similarly apprehensive like I was with the basic swatch test, that because this was a pastel set of pencils that they may not really mix properly. And for the most part, they did. The purple turned out a little bit grayer than I maybe would have liked, but I think the green and the orange that we got turned out pretty well. Onto the layering test. These pencils, being what I believe to be oil-based, they layered very well like an oil-based pencil would. I was able to put down tons of layers without any kind of wax building up. Also, the color got consistently darker as I continued to add layers. So these pencils, they layer very well and very easily. Onto the blending test. So for the blending test, I try to blend the colored pencils with a variety of different blending mediums, including just using the pencils themselves, a colorless blender pencil, a white color pencil, Gamsol, as well as an alcohol-based colorless blender marker. And so what you can see me doing here is I am coming in with the colors Wisteria. I used 3 different colors for all of these. I did use the same 3 colors. Those 3 colors were lilac, wisteria, and smalt blue. And so what you're seeing me do here is just blending with the pencils themselves. I felt that the pencils blended pretty easily. They didn't require too much effort, and I was able to get a pretty smooth blend with just the pencils themselves. And I had actually colored the page out of the Coloring Heaven book before I did this test, so I was very familiar with how the pencils blended just on their own, because that's what I did when I colored that page. And despite this paper being a little bit different than what was in the Coloring Heaven book, this paper is Strathmore's colored pencil paper, so it has a little bit more tooth than the Coloring Heaven book, but honestly I wouldn't say that much more tooth. But despite the slight difference in the papers, performance was pretty similar. So I went ahead and colored the other 4 boxes off camera because you don't need to sit here and watch me color the same thing 4 different times. For the second test, I used a Prismacolor colorless blender pencil to blend these, and it turned out pretty well. They blended as you would expect a color pencil to blend with a colorless blender pencil. As usual, you do have to put down a lot of pressure to really get those colors to smush together, but they performed as expected, and I was happy with the final result. It looked a bit similar to when I had just used the pencils on their own, though it does seem a bit more smooth, the finish does. And one thing that I did notice was that it made the pigment look a little bit lighter. On its own, it's not really that noticeable, but when you compare it to the box to the left of it, it does look slightly lighter. So on to the third test, I used a white colored pencil to blend this third box. I used the Prismacolor Premier White because this set did not come with a white. And I was a little bit, I guess, interested in how this would turn out since Prismacolors are pretty waxy and these were more oil-based. I do have to say, I wasn't happy. It was very weird. It was like they just were not mixing. You would think that one of the pencils was made out of water and the other one was made out of oil based on how poorly these like mixed together. It didn't really blend them any more than they already were, and it ended up leaving quite a bit of like white blotches behind. Yeah, I wasn't happy with how this one turned out, and I was so, I guess, concerned about it that I thought, well, maybe it's because the Prismacolor is too waxy, so I tried a Polychromos white and kind of ended up with the same result. It wasn't as bad, but it was still pretty bad. So for the next test, I used Gamsol to blend the pencils, and this is the little container that I store my Gamsol in. I personally like to apply Gamsol with a Q-tip, so that's what you'll be seeing me do here. These did okay with the Gamsol. I felt that it looked a bit splotchy as I was using it. I wasn't really getting the kind of effect that I desired with it, but it wasn't too bad. But what was really weird was the next day when I came back and I looked at this sheet of paper, I noticed that this box that I used the Gamsol in was almost like it had been bleached. Like it was almost like the Gamsol had removed quite a bit of the pigment that was on the page. And I think it wasn't as apparent when the Gamsol was still wet, because things look darker when they're wet, but when it was dry, it had a bleach effect. So I would not use Gamsol with these pencils. So the next test that I did was with a colorless blender alcohol-based marker. This was by far my favorite test, and I feel like this blend turned out the best. It didn't do anything weird. It didn't take any of the pigment off of the paper, and I achieved a really smooth blend that pretty much looked like it did when I put it down on the paper. You just couldn't see the whites of the paper through it anymore. So these performed very, very, very well with an alcohol-based colorless blender marker. So this is the end result of the eraser test. So that was the next test that I did, was I tried to see how well these pencils erased with two kinds of erasers. I used a plastic eraser, and I also used a sand eraser. The specific erasers that I used were both the Tombow Mono. So one was a plastic eraser, one was a sand eraser. And as expected, the sand eraser did erase a bit better than the plastic eraser, but the plastic eraser also didn't do so bad either. It did take quite a few passes with the plastic eraser to get it to erase to the point that you see here, but once again, color pencil doesn't typically erase as easily as graphite, so that's to be expected. The sand eraser, given that it is a more rough texture, picked that pigment off the paper, picked it up off the paper much easier than the plastic eraser. But overall, I was satisfied with how well these pencils erased. So the sixth and final test that I have on my test sheet is just a basic coloring exercise where I color in what I call my elementals. So this is a leaf, a flame, and a water droplet that I drew. That I'll be coloring in with different colors for each one. And this is pretty much a culmination of everything that I've said already. I was satisfied with the way that these pencils performed. They laid down very well. They were pigmented well. They layered extremely well. Colors mixed very well. I didn't feel like I was having a fight with the pencils in order to get them to lay down the way that I wanted them to. Like I said, I think that these are oil-based because despite all of the layers that I did and mixing of colors that I did not have any issues with like the paper feeling waxy or anything like that. And for these specifically, I didn't use any blending mediums. I just used the pencils themselves, and I was happy with how they turned out. But one thing I did notice, and it probably has to do with the colors that I chose, I'm trying to color in grass, fire, and water. So I guess I wasn't looking for pastel colors, but I just thought it was interesting how there are quite a few colors in the set that can be used as not pastel colors, if that makes sense. And that's not a bad thing, but I just thought it was interesting because I was afraid as I was coloring these in, or before I started coloring them in, I was like, God, I hope they don't look like really, really light or something, right? But that was an unfounded concern, and overall I was happy with how they turned out. So overall, things I liked, I've said so much of this so many times, but this is a summary, so it's okay if I repeat myself, I think. The pencils laid down very well, and they were also well pigmented, much to my surprise. There's also a pretty good array of colors in this set. Like I said, there are, true pastels, and then there are, a few colors that, if you know which colors to pick, they don't turn out looking quite so pastel, kind of like you can see here. So that's good. I do think that they're oil-based. I can't say that with certainty. Apparently Brutfuner can't even say it with certainty, but based on how they performed, I would say that they are oil-based, which I do like oil-based pencils just because I feel that, with the way that I color and I do so many layers and I mix colors a lot, that with more waxy color pencils, even, high quality ones like Prismacolor, I run into just so much wax being built up on the paper that I can't layer and blend like I want to once I get to a certain point. So I do appreciate that these are oil-based. And also, they're a good price at less than $20, and even at the full price, they're not terrible. Well, I guess I can't say full price because I don't really know what full price is, but even at the more higher price points that I've seen them, they're not, bad, and, they're a good value, not just because they're cheap, but also because they perform well. And now on to things that I didn't like so much. I do feel that they are kind of cheap in appearance. That doesn't really matter. I guess we're talking about 30 some odd cents a pencil. They are cheap, but it's just the kind of minor details that more high-end pencils pay attention to. Like I said, you can kind of see the like primer that's underneath the paint. Sometimes the pigment itself even looks a little bit uneven, and they did feel lightweight, even though technically I guess they aren't. But all of those qualities, they don't affect the pencils, how they work at all. So they're not a big deal by any means. I guess my biggest real complaint about this set is that I wish there were more pinks and purples. Like I said, it's very heavy on the greens and neutrals. When I think of pastels, I think of pinks, I think of purples. And especially on the pinks, we really only have maybe like 4, maybe even 5, depending on personal opinion, true pink colors out of 50, and that's a bit disappointing to me. Also, I feel like some of the colors in the set, I wouldn't consider them to be pastel, particularly like leaf green and mustard and willow green, just to name a few that stick out to me as not really being pastels. It's fine. And another thing, while these do have a harder lead, they're not super, super soft, they really don't hold a point very long at all. As I was coloring, I felt like I was constantly having to sharpen my pencils. So as far as the longevity, I don't know. If you color with them a lot, I think you'll be dealing with short, stubby pencils in a relatively short period of time. So final thoughts and conclusions. This was like the first kind of budget Chinese brand off of Amazon of colored pencils that I had ever tried, and they definitely surpassed my expectations. Presentation may be lacking compared to pencils that cost 4 to 5 times as much, but honestly, as far as what matters, and that's performance, I'd say they're pretty comparable to polychromos, which I own. There's differences. Polychromos are better, but I do think these are somewhat comparable in how they perform. I can't speak on the Holbein because I don't own any Holbein. But at this price, less than $20 for 50 pencils that are pretty damn good, I really can't do anything other than recommend them if you are looking for a pastel set of colored pencils. And I know that Brutfuner also makes other, I think, just kind of regular non-pastel sets of colored pencils that are oil-based, which I'm tempted to try. I haven't, so I can't say that they perform the same as these, but given how much I liked these, I may try those other brands. But yeah, or those other pencils. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you like the video, please leave a like. If you have any questions or concerns or anything like that, feel free to leave a comment below, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.